The alarm on Marcus Thompson's watch buzzed at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before the official time. He'd set it that way intentionally, a small ritual that had defined his military career for the last 15 years. Marcus believed in arriving early, preparing thoroughly, and never giving anyone a reason to question his dedication. As he sat on the edge of his modest bed in the BOQ, Bachelor Officer Quarters, though he was technically a civilian contractor, he rubbed his weathered hands together. The calluses on his palms told the story of a man who worked with his hands, not his words. Grease stains that no amount of scrubbing could remove had become permanent fixtures on his skin, badges of honor he wore without complaint. The morning was still dark outside his window, the San Diego sky painted in shades of deep blue and purple. Marcus pulled on his navy blue work uniform, the same one he'd worn for over a decade. The fabric was faded in places, but it was clean, pressed, and professional. He knotted his bootlaces with military precision, muscle memory from his early days as an enlisted mechanic, before he'd advanced to become a master-level technician. At 52 years old, Marcus had logged more hours on military aircraft than most pilots would ever fly. His reputation was impeccable: 0 safety incidents, countless commendations, and the unwavering respect of every maintenance crew member who'd ever worked under his supervision. He grabbed his thermos of black coffee from the small kitchenette and headed out into the pre-dawn darkness. The drive to Naval Air Station Coronado took 15 minutes, a route he'd driven so many times he could navigate it with his eyes closed. The gates of the base loomed ahead, and Marcus waved at the security guard, a young sailor named Rodriguez who'd come to respect Marcus's quiet professionalism. "Early morning, Chief," Rodriguez called out, using the informal title many crew members had adopted for Marcus, though he held no official rank. "Always am, son," Marcus replied with a slight smile. The Pacific Ocean gleamed in the distance as he drove toward Hangar 7, the massive structure where he spent most of his working hours. This hangar was his domain, his kingdom. Here, among the FA-18 Super Hornets worth millions of dollars each, Marcus felt truly alive. He understood these machines in ways that went beyond technical manuals. He could listen to an engine and diagnose problems by sound alone. He could feel the subtle vibrations in hydraulic systems and know instinctively when something wasn't quite right. The hangar was empty except for the aircraft. Marcus walked toward the jet he'd been working on for the past 3 days, tail number 204, a beautiful machine with combat history painted on its fuselage. He discovered a problem with the landing gear hydraulic system during routine maintenance. The pressure readings were inconsistent, fluctuating in ways that violated safety protocols. Marcus had immediately grounded the aircraft, filling out the mandatory maintenance report and flagging it for extensive repair. This was standard procedure, something he'd done hundreds of times without incident. The aircraft couldn't fly until the hydraulics were replaced and tested. It was that simple. At 6:15 a.m., Marcus began his detailed inspection, running through his pre-flight checklist with the concentration of a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. Every bolt, every connection, every system received his full attention. He photographed potential problem areas with the digital camera he kept in his toolbox. Documentation was crucial. It protected both the aircraft and the pilots who would eventually fly them. He was so focused on his work that he didn't notice the commotion building in the hangar around 7:30 a.m. Captain James Reeves had arrived at the base like a storm front, all bluster and ego. He was newly promoted to commanding officer of the squadron, a position he'd pursued relentlessly through political maneuvering rather than earned through demonstrated excellence. Reeves was the type of officer who believed that rank automatically conferred competence, that his commission made him infallible. At 45 years old, he had less actual flight experience than pilots half his age, having spent most of his career in administrative positions. But he wore his captain's insignia like a badge of invincibility. Thompson, Reeves's voice boomed across the hangar. Where's the pilot for bird 204? Marcus looked up from his inspection, wiping his hands on an already filthy rag. Aircraft is grounded, sir. Hydraulic system requires replacement. I filed the maintenance report yesterday. Reeves's face darkened. I don't care about your report. I need that jet in the air in 2 hours. We have a training mission scheduled, and I'm not canceling it because of some mechanic's paranoia. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He'd been through this before. Officers who didn't understand that maintenance wasn't bureaucratic obstruction but life-saving protocol. Sir, the pressure readings are outside acceptable parameters. The landing gear won't be safe. You're telling me, Reeves stepped closer, his voice dripping with contempt, that a $60 million aircraft is going to stay grounded because you're worried about some numbers on a gauge. You know what I think, Thompson. I think you're washed up. I think you've been doing this job so long you've forgotten how to take risks. Real pilots don't let mechanics like you scare them with your safety concerns. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Around them, the maintenance crew had stopped working, frozen in awkward silence. Junior mechanics looked down at their shoes, unable to meet Marcus's eyes. The humiliation burned through him, not because Reeves was right, but because he was so fundamentally, dangerously wrong, and yet wielded the authority to act on his ignorance. Sir, respectfully, I cannot release this aircraft, Marcus said quietly, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. The safety protocols exist for a reason. Reeves laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that echoed through the hangar. You know what? I'm going to override your decision. Get this aircraft ready to fly, or I'll have you removed from this base for insubordination. He turned to address the crew, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. This is what happens when you let people get comfortable in their positions. They forget who's in charge. They forget that I give the orders and mechanics take them. The words hung in the air like poisoned gas. Marcus stood motionless, his hands clenching into fists. Every muscle in his body wanted to throw the wrench he was holding, to march up to Reeves and tell him exactly what he thought of his leadership. But Marcus had learned long ago that impulse control was the mark of a true professional. He took a deep breath, set down his tools with deliberate care, and looked directly at Reeves. I need that order in writing, sir, and I'll need it documented that I objected to the aircraft's release due to safety concerns. Reeves's eyes flashed with triumph. Of course you do, trying to cover your ass already. He turned to the assembled crew. This is what I'm talking about. This is exactly the kind of cowardice that weakens our military. He stormed out of the hangar, his combat boots echoing against the concrete floor. Marcus stood alone in the middle of Hangar 7, surrounded by people who wouldn't meet his gaze. 15 years of dedication, hundreds of commendations, a perfect safety record, all of it suddenly seemed meaningless. He'd been publicly humiliated by a man whose competence he questioned and whose judgment he feared. And the worst part was that everyone had witnessed it. He walked slowly to the back of the hangar to the small office where he kept his personal files. Marcus sat down heavily in his chair and stared at the wall. Something had shifted today, something fundamental. He'd always believed that professionalism and integrity would be recognized and rewarded. Now he wasn't so sure. As the day progressed, Marcus made a decision. He would document everything Reeves said and did, not out of revenge, but out of principle. If Reeves was willing to ignore safety protocols for his own ambition, what else was he capable of? That evening, sitting alone in his apartment, Marcus would discover something that would change everything. A pattern in the tactical radio frequencies that suggested something far more sinister than Captain Reeves's incompetence. But for now, he simply sat in his office, nursing his wounded pride and wondering if his career would ever recover from this morning's humiliation. Marcus couldn't sleep. He tried everything: warm milk, deep breathing exercises, even the old trick of counting backwards from 100. Nothing worked. His mind kept replaying the events of the morning, each humiliating word from Captain Reeves echoing through his consciousness like a broken record. At 11:47 p.m., he gave up pretending and pulled himself out of bed. The apartment was dark and silent, the kind of quiet that only amplified his frustration. He shuffled to the small kitchen and made a fresh pot of coffee, knowing full well that caffeine would keep him awake even longer. But Marcus needed something to do, something to occupy his restless hands and racing mind. He settled into the worn leather armchair in his living room, the one piece of furniture he'd kept for nearly 20 years, and pulled out his personal laptop. The screen glowed softly in the darkness, illuminating his weathered face. Marcus had developed a habit over the years of downloading routine maintenance logs and communications transcripts, partly out of professional paranoia, partly out of genuine interest in the technical aspects of base operations. He'd never actually needed them. They were simply part of his meticulous documentation system. Tonight, however, they might provide a distraction from his wounded pride. Marcus opened the folder labeled Base Communications, March 2024, and began scrolling through the day's tactical radio transmissions. These were standard, unclassified communications between flight operations, ground control, and various maintenance teams. They were mundane records of routine military operations, pilots requesting clearance, weather updates, maintenance status reports. The kind of chatter that occurred thousands of times daily across military installations worldwide. Marcus had reviewed similar logs countless times, without finding anything remotely interesting. But tonight, something made him pause. At approximately 2:14 p.m., right around the time Reeves had been storming through the hangar demanding aircraft release, there was a burst of radio traffic that seemed somehow different. The transmissions were encrypted, which wasn't unusual for sensitive communications, but the pattern of the encrypted sequences caught Marcus's attention. He'd spent 15 years listening to military radio traffic, and his ear had developed an almost supernatural sensitivity to irregular patterns. These sequences didn't sound like standard encrypted communications. They sounded deliberate, almost artificial in their construction. Marcus leaned forward, his coffee forgotten. He pulled up the audio files and played them back at various speeds, listening intently. His experienced ear picked up something that a casual listener would have missed, a rhythmic structure underlying the encrypted data. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was definitely there. The sequences repeated at intervals, creating a pattern that seemed too organized to be random. His heart rate accelerated. This wasn't paranoia or insomnia-induced imagination. This was something real. He spent the next hour cross-referencing the unusual radio signals with his personal notes on daily base activities. The encrypted bursts appeared at specific times: 2:14 p.m., 3:47 p.m., and 5:32 p.m. Marcus checked the day's flight schedule and noticed something peculiar. Each burst of unusual radio traffic corresponded with classified briefings held in the operations center. His hands trembled slightly as he typed notes into a document, creating a timeline of anomalies. By 2:30 a.m., Marcus had filled 6 pages with observations. The patterns were unmistakable to his trained eye. These weren't random communications glitches or standard encrypted traffic. Someone was deliberately embedding signals into the routine radio communications, signals that appeared to correlate with the movement of classified information. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't a counterintelligence specialist, and he certainly wasn't trained in signals analysis, but his decades of military experience screamed that something was fundamentally wrong. He stood up and paced his small apartment, his mind racing through possibilities. Could this be a security test? Could the base be running some kind of drill he wasn't aware of? He pulled up the email archives and searched for any announcements about security exercises. Nothing. No drills, no tests, no explanations for the anomalies he'd discovered. Marcus sat back down and pulled out his personal notebook, the one he'd carried for 15 years, and began writing in his precise, methodical handwriting. The implications were staggering. If someone was embedding signals into military communications, they were doing so for a reason. They wanted to communicate something covertly. They wanted to exchange information without detection. And the only reason military personnel would use such methods was if they were trying to hide something from official channels. Marcus felt sick. Was he really thinking what he was thinking? Was he actually considering the possibility of espionage on his own base? He returned to his laptop and pulled up more communications records, this time spanning the previous 3 months. If this was recent activity, there might be a longer pattern he could identify. Marcus's fingers flew across the keyboard as he compiled spreadsheets and timelines. Hours dissolved as he worked with singular focus, his earlier humiliation completely forgotten. This was what he was truly good at, identifying patterns, noticing details that others overlooked, understanding complex systems through careful observation. By 4:47 a.m., Marcus had compiled enough data to convince himself that something was definitely occurring. The encrypted signals appeared approximately 3 times per week, always during classified briefings or when sensitive information was being transmitted. The frequency had increased over the past month. Someone on the base was deliberately communicating through the military radio system in ways designed to evade normal monitoring. And from the sophistication of the embedding technique, whoever was doing this knew exactly what they were doing. Marcus sat back and rubbed his eyes. He was exhausted, his body demanding sleep, but his mind remained hyperactive with the implications of his discovery. What should he do? His first instinct was to report this to the chain of command. But the chain of command, at least at the base level, led directly to Captain James Reeves, the man who just humiliated him, who'd questioned his competence in front of his entire crew, who'd ordered him to release an unsafe aircraft. Would Reeves even listen to him? Would he dismiss Marcus's concerns as the paranoid ramblings of a disgruntled mechanic? Marcus understood military culture well enough to know that credibility was everything, and his credibility, as far as Captain Reeves was concerned, had just taken a massive hit. If Marcus reported this through official channels, Reeves might bury the evidence or, worse, use it as ammunition to discredit him further. "See," Reeves could say, "Thompson's so desperate to salvage his reputation that he's inventing security threats." The apartment was beginning to brighten with pre-dawn light. Marcus looked at his reflection in the dark window and barely recognized himself. The exhaustion had carved deep lines into his face. His eyes were red-rimmed from staring at the screen. But there was something else in his expression, something determined, almost fierce. He'd spent a lifetime following rules, respecting the chain of command, trusting the system. But the system, he was beginning to understand, could be corrupted from within. Marcus made a decision then, a pivotal choice that would set him on a path he couldn't have anticipated. He would investigate this further, quietly and carefully, using only information he could access through legitimate means. He would document everything meticulously, building an airtight case that no one could dismiss or discredit. And only when he had irrefutable evidence would he bring it to someone who might actually listen. He had no way of knowing, sitting in his darkened apartment at dawn, that his careful investigation would eventually reach the ears of a legendary admiral. He had no way of knowing that this sleepless night would fundamentally alter the trajectory of his life. All Marcus knew was that something was wrong, and he was the only one who'd noticed it. The responsibility was both terrifying and exhilarating. As the sun rose over San Diego, Marcus closed his laptop and finally allowed himself to collapse into bed. But even as sleep claimed him, his mind continued working, processing data, identifying patterns. The strange radio codes played through his dreams like a haunting melody, cryptic and compelling, demanding to be understood. He would learn their meaning soon enough, and when he did, everything would change. The following week became a blur of double lives. By day, Marcus maintained his facade of normalcy, arriving early to Hangar 7, conducting maintenance inspections, managing the crew. but Captain Reeves's presence had infected the space with tension. The captain made a point of walking through the hangar at least twice daily, his eyes searching for any excuse to criticize Marcus's work. Marcus kept his head down, his responses professional and minimal. He documented every interaction meticulously, knowing that his every action was now being scrutinized. But the nights belonged to Marcus alone. Every evening after 8 p.m., when the base had quieted and most personnel had left for off-base accommodations, Marcus would make his way to the communications archive building. The building was theoretically secure, requiring proper clearance and access codes. But Marcus's 15 years of service had earned him multiple levels of clearance, and the security personnel knew him by name. Chief Rodriguez at the entrance would simply wave him through with a knowing nod, assuming Marcus had legitimate work-related reasons for being there. No one questioned a man with his reputation. The archive room itself was climate-controlled and hummed with the soft sound of servers processing data. Marcus had spent enough time there over the years that he understood the system intimately. The communications were stored in massive databases, indexed by date, time, sender, receiver, and classification level. He'd begin by pulling up the day's tactical radio transmissions. The same ones he discovered contained the strange encrypted patterns. But this time, he wasn't just listening casually. He was documenting everything. Marcus created an encrypted folder on a secure USB drive he kept on his person at all times. He labeled it innocuously, personal maintenance notes, but inside, he was building a comprehensive database of anomalies. Each night, he would extract radio transmission records, convert them to audio files, and load them onto his drive. He recorded timestamps, frequencies, encryption protocols, and his observations about the unusual patterns embedded within the standard communications. By Wednesday of that first week, Marcus had identified 23 instances of the strange encoded signals. They appeared with clockwork regularity, approximately 3 times per day, always during specific windows of time, always when classified information was being transmitted. The sophistication of the embedding technique fascinated and terrified him in equal measure. Whoever was responsible for this new advanced signals manipulation, they understood encryption protocols. They possessed both technical expertise and access to sensitive communication systems. Friday night, Marcus's investigation took a significant leap forward. He'd begun cross-referencing the timing of the anomalous radio signals with visitor logs to the base. The communications archive system maintained detailed records of who accessed classified information, when they accessed it, and what specific documents or communications they reviewed. It was a security measure designed to prevent exactly the kind of espionage Marcus was tracking. He pulled up the visitor logs for the days containing the anomalies and began sorting through them systematically. Most entries were routine: military personnel, contractors, administrative staff. But one name appeared with suspicious frequency: Dr. Derek Vance, senior engineer at Phoenix Dynamics, a private defense contractor with secure clearance to access classified systems. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. He pulled up more records, searching for every instance of Dr. Vance's base access over the past 6 months. The pattern that emerged was unmistakable. Vance had visited the base on 17 separate occasions in the past 3 months, and on every single occasion when Vance was present on the base, the strange encrypted signals appeared in the tactical radio communications. The correlation was too perfect to be coincidental. Marcus sat back in his chair, his mind spinning through the implications. Dr. Vance represented Phoenix Dynamics, a contractor working on advanced weapons system development and integration with the naval fleet. That meant Vance had legitimate reasons to access classified systems, but the timing was just too convenient, too synchronized. Someone with Vance's technical expertise could certainly embed signals into military communications. The question was why, and who else was involved? Marcus began documenting the Vance connection with meticulous care. He photographed visitor log entries using his personal smartphone, creating digital backups stored in encrypted cloud folders accessible only to him. He cross-referenced Vance's visit dates with classified document access logs, discovering that the engineer's presence on base coincided not just with the anomalous radio signals, but with the movement of highly sensitive information regarding naval fleet deployments and submarine operations. Saturday morning, Marcus met with Senior Chief James "Bull" Morrison at a small diner off base, far from any military installations. Bull was a fellow veteran who'd retired 5 years earlier but maintained connections throughout the naval community. Marcus trusted him implicitly. They'd served together for over a decade and had weathered countless military assignments and relocations. If anyone would understand the gravity of what Marcus had discovered, it would be Bull. They ordered coffee and sat in a corner booth away from other patrons. Marcus placed his laptop on the table but kept the screen positioned so only Bull could see it. He began laying out his findings methodically: the radio anomalies, the embedded signals, the correlation with classified information transmission, the suspicious visits by Dr. Vance. He showed Bull the spreadsheets, the timelines, the photographs of visitor logs. Each piece of evidence supported the larger narrative. Someone was using the base's secure communications systems to transmit classified information, and Dr. Derek Vance appeared to be centrally involved. Bull's weathered face grew progressively more serious as he reviewed the evidence. When Marcus finished, Bull didn't speak immediately. He simply sat back, nursing his coffee, processing what he'd been shown. Finally, he leaned forward and spoke quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus, do you understand what you're suggesting?" "Espionage," Marcus replied. "Someone on the base or with access to the base is leaking classified information, and I think it's connected to Phoenix dynamics." Bull nodded slowly. "This is bigger than base security. This is national security. The information you're describing, fleet deployments, submarine locations, weapons system specifications, that's the kind of intelligence that could cost lives if it fell into the wrong hands." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He'd intellectually understood the implications, but hearing Bull voice them made them suddenly, brutally real. Lives could be at stake. American service members could be endangered by whatever espionage operation was occurring under Captain Reeves's blind watch. "So what do I do?" Marcus asked. "I can't go through the normal chain of command. Reeves won't listen, and if I report this through official channels, he'll just bury it." Bull set down his coffee cup carefully. "You need someone outside the base chain of command. Someone with authority and the resources to investigate properly. Someone who understands the gravity of what you found and won't dismiss you as a disgruntled mechanic." "But who?" Marcus asked. "I'm nobody, Bull. I'm a maintenance contractor with a high school diploma. Who's going to believe me over an officer and a defense contractor?" Bull smiled slightly, that knowing expression that had always suggested he possessed information others didn't. "Admiral David Hartley is visiting NAS Coronado next week. He's overseeing intelligence operations for the Pacific Fleet. The man's a legend, 30 years in the SEALs before moving into intelligence. He understands how to identify the truth in chaos." Bull paused, letting the implication settle. "If there's anyone who will listen to you, Marcus, it's him." Marcus felt simultaneous relief and terror. An admiral, the highest level of leadership he could imagine. But what if Admiral Hartley dismissed him? What if Bull was wrong about how seriously he'd take the investigation? What if Marcus's evidence, meticulously documented as it was, still sounded like the paranoid ramblings of someone with a grudge against Captain Reeves? Bull reached across the table and placed his hand firmly on Marcus's shoulder. "Trust me, you've done good work here. You've identified something serious that most people would have missed. Just present the evidence clearly and let the facts speak for themselves." That night back in his apartment, Marcus organized his evidence one final time. He created copies of everything on multiple USB drives, storing them in different locations. One in his apartment safe, one at his bank, one hidden in his work locker. If something happened to him, if someone discovered his investigation, at least the evidence would survive. He'd learned enough about espionage to understand that people protecting sensitive operations could be dangerous. Marcus reviewed the timeline one more time before sleep claimed him. The radio anomalies, the embedded signals, the correlation with Dr. Vance's visits, the classified information being transmitted. The pattern was clear. The evidence was solid, and within days he would present it to an admiral who might actually have the power to act. He had no way of knowing that his careful investigation was about to trigger events that would shake the very foundations of naval security. Monday morning arrived with crystalline clarity. The San Diego sky was impossibly blue, the kind of perfect weather that seemed almost mocking given the tension churning in Marcus's stomach. Admiral David Hartley had arrived at NAS Coronado the previous evening, and according to Bull's contacts, he would be conducting routine inspections of base facilities throughout the day. The gym was scheduled for 6:30 a.m., a fact Bull had somehow managed to extract from the Admiral's itinerary. Marcus had barely slept the night before, his mind cycling through dozens of scenarios, each one more anxiety-inducing than the last. He arrived at the base gym at 6:15 a.m., dressed in workout clothes, carrying a gym bag with his encrypted USB drive tucked safely inside. The plan was deliberately casual, a chance encounter that would look like nothing more than two service members crossing paths at the fitness facility. It was simple enough, but Marcus's hands were trembling slightly as he changed into his workout gear in the locker room. He'd rehearsed what he would say 100 times, but the words felt clumsy and presumptuous. Who was he to approach a decorated admiral with accusations of espionage? At 6:32 a.m., Admiral David Hartley walked into the gym. Marcus recognized him immediately from the photographs Bull had shown him. Hartley was a striking figure despite his 58 years, lean and muscular, moving with the economical grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime in elite military units. His gray hair was cut short, military precision evident in every aspect of his appearance. But what struck Marcus most was his eyes. They were the eyes of a man who'd seen things, understood things, possessed an almost preternatural ability to read people. The Admiral moved directly to the treadmill section and began his warm-up routine without acknowledging anyone else in the gym. Marcus started on a rowing machine, positioning himself in Hartley's peripheral vision. He rowed with deliberate intensity, not trying to seem casual, that would be worse, but simply working out as any military contractor might. 20 minutes passed. 30. Marcus's muscles began burning, sweat dripping onto the machine. The Admiral had moved to the free weights, lifting with focused intensity, his movements precise and controlled. Finally, at 7:04 a.m., Bull's predicted moment arrived. The Admiral finished his set and reached for his towel, walking directly toward the water fountain near where Marcus was still rowing. Bull had timed this perfectly. The Admiral paused, acknowledged Marcus with a slight nod, the kind of recognition one service member might give another, and began drinking water. "Admiral," Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt, "could I speak with you for a moment? It's important." Hartley turned, studying Marcus with those penetrating eyes. "I don't believe we've met." "No, sir, but Senior Chief Morrison recommended I reach out to you. There's a security matter I've discovered that I believe requires your attention." The Admiral's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, a subtle tensing that suggested he'd immediately recognized the seriousness in Marcus's tone. "Not here. My office at 1000 hours. Ask at the command center for directions." He returned to drinking his water without waiting for a response, then returned to his workout. Marcus felt simultaneously relieved and terrified. He had less than 3 hours to prepare himself for the most consequential conversation of his life. The Admiral's temporary office at the base was nondescript, a secure room in the intelligence operations building with a single desk, several chairs, and absolutely no personal decoration. Security protocols prevented anyone from entering without proper clearance. When Marcus arrived at exactly 9:55 a.m., a master-at-arms escorted him through multiple checkpoints and identity verifications. The weight of what he was about to do pressed down on him with physical force. Admiral Hartley was already seated when Marcus entered. The Admiral didn't rise to greet him, a deliberate choice that established the power dynamic immediately. Marcus was a visitor, a supplicant bringing information, not an equal. Hartley gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit. Tell me what's so important that it requires an admiral's attention at 1,000 hours on a Monday morning." Marcus took a breath, steadied his nerves, and began. He started with the discovery of the anomalous radio signals, explaining his methodology in clear, technical terms. He showed the Admiral his encrypted USB drive and requested permission to display the evidence on the secure computer in the office. Hartley studied him throughout, his expression revealing nothing, his eyes missing no detail. When Marcus finished his initial explanation, the Admiral simply nodded. "Show me." What followed was an hour-long presentation of evidence. Marcus had prepared thoroughly, creating clear visual representations of the data. He displayed spreadsheets showing the correlation between radio anomalies and classified information movement. He presented timelines documenting Dr. Vance's visits to the base. He showed audio files of the encrypted signals, explaining the suspicious patterns he'd identified. Throughout, Admiral Hartley asked precise, penetrating questions that demonstrated he understood the technical aspects of what Marcus was describing. "How confident are you in your analysis?" the Admiral asked at one point. "95% certain," Marcus replied. "I've reviewed the data from multiple angles. The correlation between Vance's presence and the anomalous signals is too precise to be coincidental." Hartley leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You understand what you're alleging, don't you? You're suggesting that a civilian defense contractor is using military communication systems to transmit classified information. That's espionage. That's treason." "I understand, sir. And you brought this to me instead of your chain of command. Why?" Marcus hesitated. This was the dangerous moment, the moment where honesty could cost him. "Because my commanding officer, Captain James Reeves, has demonstrated questionable judgment. He prioritizes his own advancement over security protocols. I don't trust him to take this seriously." The Admiral's lips curled slightly, not quite a smile but an acknowledgement. "You're concerned he'll bury the evidence?" "Yes, sir, I am." Hartley stood and walked to the window, looking out toward the flight line where jets sat in neat rows, gleaming in the morning sun. He was silent for nearly 2 minutes, his posture suggesting deep contemplation. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority tempered with genuine concern. "Thompson, I've spent 30 years in the SEAL teams and 15 years in intelligence. I've learned to recognize certain qualities in people. Instinct, attention to detail, integrity. You possess all three. This evidence you've compiled suggests systematic espionage at a level that could compromise naval operations across the Pacific Fleet. If even a fraction of what you've presented is accurate, American service members could be at risk." He turned back to face Marcus directly. "I'm going to launch an investigation, a classified investigation that will proceed outside normal command channels. You'll continue your work at the base, acting normally, speaking to no one about this conversation. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "This won't be quick. This won't be easy. And if you're wrong about any of this, it will destroy your career. People don't appreciate being accused of espionage on faulty evidence." "I understand, sir." The Admiral extended his hand. Marcus stood and shook it, feeling the firm grip of a man accustomed to leading in dangerous situations. "You've done good work here, Thompson, real good work. The kind of work that most people would overlook, the kind of attention to detail that saves lives." He paused, dismissed. Marcus left the office in a daze, hardly believing the conversation had actually occurred. Admiral David hardly believed him. The Admiral was launching an investigation. Everything Marcus had worked toward over the past week had crystallized into action. But as he walked back toward Hangar 7, a new anxiety began building. He'd opened a door that couldn't be closed. Whoever was responsible for the espionage operation would have no idea they were being investigated. They would continue their activities, believing they were secure. And if they discovered the investigation, if they felt threatened, there was no telling what they might do. That evening, sitting in his apartment, Marcus reviewed the Admiral's words one more time. The kind of work that saves lives. He clung to that thought as darkness fell over San Diego. He'd done the right thing. He'd reported what he'd found to someone with the authority and integrity to act on it. Whatever came next, at least he could live with his conscience. He had no way of knowing that the Admiral's investigation would expand far beyond Dr. Vance, reaching into the highest levels of naval command, uncovering a conspiracy that stretched across multiple military installations and involved personnel he would never have suspected. The game had begun in earnest. Admiral Hartley worked with the precision of a master craftsman, each move calculated, each action deliberate. Within 48 hours of his conversation with Marcus, federal agents from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS, had quietly arrived at NAS Coronado. They operated with absolute discretion, establishing a secure operations center in an unmarked building off base. No one at the naval station knew they were there. No one knew that the Admiral had initiated a full counterintelligence investigation that would eventually reshape the security protocols of the entire Pacific Fleet. Marcus continued his daily routine with meticulous normalcy. He arrived early, conducted inspections, managed his crew, and endured Captain Reeves's continued contempt. But now, his work had taken on a different dimension. He was part of something larger than himself, a piece in a puzzle that was slowly being assembled by people with far greater resources and authority than he possessed. 3 times per week, he would leave the base and meet with a federal agent designated only as Special Agent Chen at various locations throughout San Diego, coffee shops, parks, shopping centers. Never the same place twice, always appearing like random civilian encounters rather than clandestine meetings. At their third meeting, Chen brought news that made Marcus's blood run cold. "We've expanded the investigation beyond Dr. Vance," Chen explained, speaking quietly while pretending to browse merchandise at a farmer's market. "Your timeline and correlation analysis were accurate, but Vance isn't working alone. We've identified a second party involved in the espionage operation." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "Who?" "We can't reveal that yet, but the investigation has grown exponentially. We're now examining classified communications spanning 18 months. The scope of the information breach is significantly larger than we initially suspected." Over the following weeks, Marcus gleaned fragments of information from his periodic meetings with Chen. The investigation had uncovered a sophisticated foreign intelligence operation targeting American naval capabilities. 2 distinct foreign intelligence services, one from a Near East nation, one from an Eastern European country, had been receiving classified American military information. The compromised data included submarine deployment schedules, advanced weapons system specifications, tactical procedures for specialized military operations, and even the identities of certain covert operatives. The implications were staggering. Lives could be at stake. Operations could be compromised. The security foundation of the entire Pacific Fleet had been undermined by a conspiracy that had operated undetected for over a year. Marcus began experiencing physical symptoms of stress. His sleep became fragmented and nightmarish. He developed tension headaches that lasted for hours. At the base, he found himself watching his crew differently, wondering if any of them might be involved in the espionage operation. He analyzed every conversation, every glance, every interaction for signs of deception. The burden of knowledge was crushing. One evening, approximately 3 weeks into the investigation, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Admiral Hartley appeared at his apartment door at 7:15 p.m., dressed in civilian clothes, arriving alone in an unmarked sedan. Marcus hadn't expected direct contact with the Admiral outside of official channels. The visit itself suggested that something significant had occurred. Hartley accepted a cup of coffee and settled into the leather armchair, the same one Marcus had occupied the night he discovered the radio anomalies. The Admiral seemed tired, lines etched deeper around his eyes than they'd been just weeks earlier. "I wanted you to hear this from me directly," Hartley began. "We've identified the second conspirator. It's a military officer, Lieutenant Commander Kevin Walsh, stationed in the Intelligence Operations Division at your base." Marcus felt the room tilt slightly. An officer. A career intelligence officer with access to classified systems and the technical knowledge to embed signals into secure communications. Walsh has been receiving payments from foreign intelligence services through shell corporations and offshore accounts. We estimate he's been compensated approximately $847,000 over the past 18 months. The betrayal was staggering. An officer, someone sworn to protect classified information, had deliberately compromised military secrets for personal financial gain. Marcus struggled to process the magnitude of the betrayal. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Federal agents are preparing arrest warrants for both Vance and Walsh. The investigation will accelerate significantly over the next few weeks. Your timeline and analysis were crucial in establishing the foundation for this expanded investigation. Without your initial discovery of the radio anomalies, we might not have caught this operation before it caused irreparable damage to naval operations." Hartley stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening San Diego landscape. "The damage assessment is complete. We've identified specific operations that were compromised by the leaked information. A classified SEAL team deployment scheduled for 6 weeks from now would have been catastrophically exposed if we hadn't identified this operation when we did. American service members would have been walking into an ambush. You likely saved their lives, Thompson." The weight of that revelation nearly overwhelmed Marcus. His insomnia, his stress, his careful documentation, it had all been in service of something genuinely important. Lives had been at stake. American service members would have died if the espionage operation had remained undetected for another 6 weeks. "What about Captain Reeves?" Marcus asked. "Was he involved?" Hartley turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "We found no evidence of direct involvement in the espionage operation. However, his gross negligence in maintaining security protocols on his watch will likely result in significant consequences. An officer's responsibility includes ensuring that his command operates according to security standards. Reeves failed in that responsibility spectacularly." The arrests came on a Tuesday morning. Marcus was conducting routine maintenance inspections when federal agents escorted Dr. Vance from the base. The defense contractor's face was pale, his expensive suit now a symbol of nothing but corruption and betrayal. Within an hour, Lieutenant Commander Walsh was similarly removed from the base in a separate vehicle. The shock rippled through NAS Coronado like an earthquake. Officers gathered in hushed clusters, speculation flowing like wildfire through the command structure. Security protocols were immediately tightened, briefings were conducted, questions were asked. Marcus maintained his normal routine despite the chaos erupting around him. Captain Reeves appeared haggard and stressed, obviously aware that the security breaches had occurred on his watch. But Reeves's attention was soon diverted when he received notification that his command was under investigation. The captain's blustering confidence evaporated. He began arriving earlier and staying later, desperately trying to demonstrate competence and vigilance. But everyone recognized what was truly occurring: damage control by an officer who'd failed in his fundamental responsibilities. Special Agent Chen met with Marcus one final time at a park near the waterfront. They sat on a bench overlooking the harbor, watching sailboats move across the blue water. "The investigation is moving forward," Chen explained. "Both Vance and Walsh are cooperating, providing detailed testimony about the intelligence operation. Their cooperation is crucial in identifying the foreign intelligence officers who recruited them and received the classified information." "Will there be public disclosure?" Marcus asked. "Eventually, yes, but not immediately. The intelligence community needs time to assess the full scope of the damage and implement countermeasures. Your name will be protected. You'll be identified only as the technician who discovered the initial anomalies. No need to paint a target on your back." Marcus appreciated the discretion. He had no desire for publicity or recognition. He simply wanted to return to his life as it had been, or as close to normal as it could be after the trauma of the past month. That night, Marcus sat in his apartment reviewing emails from Admiral Hartley's office. The Admiral wanted to meet with him again, this time to discuss something different. The investigation itself was progressing under federal authority, but the Admiral had other plans for Marcus, plans that would require him to leverage his unique skills in service of national security. Marcus had no way of knowing that this investigation was just the beginning, that the conspiracy extended deeper than anyone had imagined, that within weeks, congressional inquiries would be launched, security protocols would be completely restructured, and his name, though kept officially confidential, would become known to the highest levels of military leadership. The investigation had widened into something far larger than a simple espionage operation at a single naval base. It had become a watershed moment in military security, the kind of incident that would reshape how the armed forces protected classified information for decades to come. And Marcus Thompson, a simple aircraft mechanic with grease permanently etched into his skin, had become the central figure in that transformation. Captain James Reeves received the notification on a Thursday afternoon. His command was officially under investigation for security protocol violations and gross negligence. The letter, delivered personally by Admiral Hartley's aide, was formal and devastating. Reeves read it 3 times, his face draining of color with each pass. His career, which he'd carefully constructed through political maneuvering and carefully cultivated relationships, was collapsing in real time. By Friday morning, Reeves had deduced that Marcus Thompson was responsible for exposing the security breaches. It wasn't difficult logic to follow. Thompson had grounded the aircraft that morning. Thompson had access to communications archives. Thompson had been acting strangely for the past month. And most damningly, Thompson had recently spent time with Admiral Hartley, a fact Reeves had learned through base gossip and surveillance of the Admiral's movements. Reeves's response was predictable and desperate. He stormed into Hangar 7 at 7:30 a.m., before most of the maintenance crew had arrived. Marcus was conducting pre-flight inspections on one of the Super Hornets, completely focused on his work. Reeves's voice boomed across the empty space. "Thompson, my office, now." Marcus looked up, noted the barely controlled fury in Reeves's expression, and set down his tools. He knew this confrontation was coming. He'd prepared for it mentally, but no amount of preparation could have made it easier. He followed Reeves to the small administrative office adjacent to the hangar, closing the door behind them. Reeves didn't sit. He stood behind his desk, his hands trembling with barely suppressed rage. "You've destroyed me," he said, his voice eerily quiet. "You've gone behind my back, conspired with the Admiral, and fabricated a case against me because you're a disgruntled mechanic with a grudge." "Sir, I reported what I discovered," Marcus replied evenly, keeping his voice professional despite the storm of emotions brewing inside him. "The evidence speaks for itself." "Evidence?" Reeves laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that echoed off the metal walls. "You're a maintenance technician, Thompson. You have no training in counterintelligence. You don't understand classified operations. You don't understand the complexity of command decisions. You fabricated a conspiracy because you were humiliated in front of your crew, and you saw an opportunity to salvage your damaged ego." "I didn't fabricate anything, sir. Dr. Vance and Lieutenant Commander Walsh have both been arrested. They're cooperating with federal investigators. The evidence is real." Reeves slammed his fist on the desk. "You think you're a hero. You think you've saved the nation. But all you've done is destroy my career based on coincidence and circumstantial evidence. You didn't have the courage to report through proper channels because you knew your accusations were thin. So you went to the Admiral behind my back, poisoning him against me before I even had a chance to defend myself." Marcus felt the sting of the accusation, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Sir, with respect, the security breaches occurred on your watch. The espionage operation continued undetected for 18 months under your command. That's not a reflection of my actions. That's a reflection of leadership failures." The words were true, but they were also cruel. They were also exactly what Reeves needed to hear, and they landed like physical blows. The captain's face flushed crimson. He stood silently for a moment, his jaw clenching and unclenching as he struggled to maintain composure. "I'm going to destroy you," Reeves said quietly, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You think your career as a mechanic is safe. You think you're untouchable now. I'm going to make sure every officer from here to the Pentagon knows that you're a backstabber. I'm going to file complaints alleging that you falsified maintenance records, that you grounded aircraft unnecessarily, that you've been unreliable and untrustworthy. By the time I'm finished with you, no naval installation will hire you. Sir, get out of my office and consider your position on this base terminated. You're suspended pending the outcome of the command investigation. Don't show your face in my hangar again." Marcus left the office feeling as though he'd been physically struck. Despite knowing the confrontation was coming, despite preparing himself mentally, the reality of it was somehow worse than his imagination. Reeves was right about one thing: Marcus had chosen to report to the Admiral rather than through the chain of command. That choice, though justified in Marcus's mind, would now be weaponized against him. Reeves would claim Marcus had conspired against him. Reeves would attempt to discredit him. Reeves would fight with every tool at his disposal to salvage what remained of his career. Marcus drove to a coffee shop off base and called Special Agent Chen. They arranged an emergency meeting at a location they'd used before, a shopping mall where they could blend into the crowds without appearing conspicuous. "Reeves is going to attack my credibility," Marcus explained, sitting on a bench and pretending to read a newspaper while Chen browsed nearby. "He's going to claim I fabricated evidence out of revenge. He's going to say I'm unstable and unreliable." Chen didn't respond immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the calm confidence of someone accustomed to navigating complex legal and political situations. "The evidence against Vance and Walsh is solid. Their cooperation corroborates everything you discovered. Reeves's claims are meaningless. He's a drowning man grasping at straws." "But my career—" "Your career will be fine, Thompson. Trust me. Admiral Hartley isn't going to let you become a casualty in this situation. You're the hero of this investigation. You're the one who noticed what everyone else missed. You're the reason we caught this operation before it compromised critical military operations." That afternoon, Marcus received a call from Admiral Hartley himself. The Admiral requested an immediate meeting at his temporary office at the base. When Marcus arrived, he found not just Hartley, but also 2 other senior naval officers and a representative from the Office of Naval Intelligence. "Sit down, Thompson," Hartley said. There was no anger in his voice, only quiet authority. I want you to understand what's happening. Captain Reeves has filed formal complaints against you. He's claiming you conspired against him, that you fabricated evidence, that you're emotionally unstable. He's also claiming that the security breaches were not his responsibility, but rather the result of systemic failures across the entire fleet. Marcus felt his stomach drop. This was worse than he'd anticipated. However, Hartley continued, Captain Reeves has also inadvertently provided evidence of his own incompetence. His logs show that he was notified of security concerns on multiple occasions and chose to ignore them. His communications demonstrate a pattern of prioritizing operational schedules over security protocols. And most damning, he ordered you to ground aircraft and then demanded you release them against safety protocols. That directly violates command regulations. One of the other officers, a rear admiral with sharp, intelligent eyes, leaned forward. Thompson, your decision to ground that aircraft and stand firm against Reeves's pressure protected this installation. Your discovery of the espionage operation has prevented what could have been a catastrophic breach of national security. The Navy doesn't forget service like that. Sir, I appreciate your support, Marcus said carefully. But Captain Reeves is right about one thing. I should have reported through proper channels. Hartley shook his head. You made the judgment call that circumstances warranted. You recognized that the chain of command was compromised by incompetence and acted accordingly. That demonstrates the kind of independent thinking we need in critical security roles. It's not insubordination, it's integrity. The conversation continued for another hour, covering the timeline of events, Marcus's investigation methodology, and the current status of the federal investigation. By the time Marcus left the office, it was clear that he had powerful allies protecting his interests. Reeves's attacks would be ineffective. Reeves's career, on the other hand, was essentially finished. 2 weeks later, Captain Reeves was formally relieved of command and placed on administrative leave pending court-martial proceedings. The charges included gross negligence, failure to maintain security protocols, and conduct unbecoming an officer. The speed of his fall was stunning. The officer who'd humiliated Marcus in front of the entire maintenance crew was now facing the end of his military career. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. Reeves's own incompetence had destroyed him far more effectively than any conspiracy or vendetta. That evening, Marcus sat in his apartment and reviewed the news from the base. Reeves was being replaced by a new commanding officer, a veteran pilot with an impeccable security record and a reputation for integrity. The transition of command would occur in 2 weeks, with a formal ceremony attended by Admiral Hartley himself. Marcus realized then that his suffering, his humiliation, his careful investigation, it had all been part of something larger than his own personal vindication. He'd been an instrument of accountability. He'd forced a system to examine itself and confront its failures. He'd protected people he would never meet from dangers he couldn't fully imagine. The confrontation with Reeves was over, but Marcus's journey was far from finished. Admiral Hartley had other plans for him, plans that would take him far beyond the confines of Hangar 7. The formal ceremony took place on a Wednesday afternoon in the base's main auditorium. Hundreds of naval personnel filled the seats, officers, enlisted sailors, civilian contractors, and maintenance staff. A stage had been erected at the front, decorated with American flags and the official seals of the Naval Air Systems Command and the Pacific Fleet. Admiral David Hartley stood center stage, dressed in his dress whites, his medals and decorations catching the light like badges of honor earned through 3 decades of service. Marcus sat in the front row, feeling profoundly uncomfortable in his own dress whites, the formal uniform he rarely had occasion to wear. His maintenance crew sat around him, their expressions a mixture of pride and vindication. The younger mechanics kept glancing at him sideways, as if seeing him for the first time. Word had spread through the base about his role in the espionage investigation, though official details remained classified. Everyone understood that Marcus had done something significant, something that had reshaped the base's security infrastructure. The ceremony began with the retirement of Captain Reeves's command and the formal assumption of command by Captain Patricia Morrison, a decorated FA-18 pilot with 22 years of service and an unblemished security record. Captain Morrison's first official act was to commend the base's maintenance personnel for their unwavering commitment to safety protocols, a clear reference to the aircraft Marcus had grounded that would have flown with compromised landing gear. Then Admiral Hartley stepped to the microphone. "We gather today not just to mark a change in command, but to recognize an individual whose actions have had profound implications for naval security across the entire Pacific Fleet," Hartley began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of powerful people. "For reasons of operational security, I cannot provide full details. But I can say with absolute certainty that one person's attention to detail, one person's commitment to integrity, identified a threat that had compromised our military operations for 18 months. Marcus felt his face heating. Around him, personnel were turning to look at him. Hartley continued speaking, his words carefully measured to convey maximum appreciation without revealing classified details. The investigation that followed this discovery led to the identification and arrest of individuals engaged in espionage activities against the United States military. The information they compromised would have resulted in significant loss of life had the breach continued undetected for another 6 weeks. We can state with confidence that American service members, sailors, pilots, and special operations personnel owe their lives to the vigilance of one individual." Hartley paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the audience. "I am proud to present the Navy Achievement Medal to Marcus James Thompson, civilian contractor, aircraft maintenance technician, Naval Air Station Coronado." The auditorium erupted in applause. Marcus stood on unsteady legs as the Admiral descended from the stage and approached him. Hartley's handshake was firm, his eyes conveying genuine respect and gratitude. He pinned the medal to Marcus's dress whites, a small rectangular ribbon with a bronze anchor at its center, representing achievement and service. The medal might have seemed modest compared to military decorations worn by combat veterans, but its significance was profound. It represented the highest recognition a civilian could receive from the Navy. Tears streamed down Marcus's face as he returned to his seat. The applause continued for nearly 30 seconds. His crew members stood, clapping vigorously, their earlier skepticism completely transformed into genuine pride. Marcus looked out at the faces around him, the maintenance personnel who'd witnessed his humiliation just weeks earlier, who'd been uncertain whether to trust him or doubt him. Now they saw him clearly, a man of principle who'd risked everything to do what was right. The ceremony concluded with the traditional passing of colors and the formal assumption of Captain Morrison's command. Afterward, dozens of officers approached Marcus to shake his hand and offer congratulations. Admiral Hartley pulled him aside once the crowd had dispersed. "Walk with me," Hartley said, leading Marcus out of the auditorium toward the flight line. They walked in silence for several minutes, their footsteps echoing against the concrete. The FA-18 Super Hornets gleamed in the afternoon sun, magnificent machines that represented billions of dollars in military technology and capability. Hartley paused at the edge of the flight line, gazing out at the aircraft. "Do you know what I've learned in 30 years of military service?" Hartley asked, though he didn't wait for a response. "Real strength isn't about rank or volume. It's not about how many people you command or how much authority your position carries. Real strength is about integrity. It's about seeing what others overlook and having the courage to act on what you see." He turned to face Marcus directly. "You possessed all of that, Thompson. You identified an anomaly that 99% of military personnel would have dismissed as meaningless noise in the communications system. You investigated methodically and professionally. You reported your findings to someone you believed would take them seriously. That's not insubordination. That's the highest form of service. "Thank you, sir," Marcus said quietly. "I have a proposal for you," Hartley continued. "The Navy is implementing new security protocols across the entire Pacific Fleet. We're creating a division dedicated specifically to identifying anomalies in communication systems, threats that don't fit standard patterns. We need people with your unique combination of technical expertise, pattern recognition ability, and integrity. I'd like to offer you a position as a civilian consultant for naval intelligence. The position would involve classified work, significant responsibility, and compensation well above your current rate." Marcus felt the world tilt slightly. "You want me to leave my position as a mechanic? I want you to leverage your talents in service of something larger than maintaining individual aircraft. You have a gift for seeing patterns others miss. That gift can protect an entire fleet. It can save lives on a scale far larger than your current work." Marcus looked back at Hangar 7, visible in the distance. He thought about his 15 years maintaining aircraft, the satisfaction he'd derived from meticulous work, the pride of knowing that pilots trusted their lives to his expertise. But he also thought about what Hartley had said about the classified SEAL team deployment that would have been ambushed if the espionage operation hadn't been discovered. He thought about the hundreds or thousands of service members whose operations had been compromised, whose lives had been at risk. "I'll accept the position, sir," Marcus said. Hartley smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his stern features. "Excellent. We'll begin paperwork immediately. Your official transition will be completed within 2 weeks. You'll maintain your cover as a base contractor while your intelligence work begins. Eventually, you'll move to classified offices off base." Over the following months, the full scope of the espionage operation was revealed through careful investigation and the cooperation of Vance and Walsh. Dr. Derek Vance had been recruited by Foreign Intelligence Services during a research conference in Singapore. He'd been offered substantial compensation in exchange for providing access to classified naval systems integration documents. Vance had accepted, driven by financial ambition and a sense of grievance about his compensation relative to other defense contractors. Lieutenant Commander Kevin Walsh had been recruited through different means, blackmail based on compromising information about his personal life, combined with financial inducements. Walsh, desperate and trapped, had provided access to classified communications systems and assisted in embedding the covert signals that Vance and his handlers used to transmit information. The damage assessment revealed that information about 17 separate military operations had been compromised. 3 submarine deployments had been tracked by Foreign Intelligence Services. Advanced weapons system specifications had been disseminated to adversarial nations. The identities of 2 undercover operatives had been exposed, forcing them to abandon their missions and relocate. The federal investigation expanded to include personnel at 3 other naval installations, revealing that Walsh had shared classified information through a broader network. The conspiracy extended far beyond NAS Coronado. It represented a systematic vulnerability in military security that hadn't been properly identified or addressed. Congress demanded answers. Senate committees convened. Investigations expanded. The Secretary of the Navy ordered comprehensive security audits across the entire Department of Defense. The intelligence community implemented new protocols for monitoring communications and verifying the legitimacy of signals embedded in encrypted systems. And at the center of it all was Marcus Thompson's initial discovery, his recognition of an anomaly that didn't fit the expected pattern. His simple observation had triggered a cascade of events that reshaped military security. 2 weeks after the medal ceremony, Marcus attended his final day as a mechanic in Hangar 7. His crew organized a small going-away gathering, presenting him with a plaque recognizing his service. The younger mechanics, who'd witnessed his humiliation and then his vindication, thanked him for setting an example of integrity and courage. That evening, Marcus cleaned out his locker for the last time. He gathered his personal tools, the ones he'd accumulated over 15 years. His hands, still marked with permanent grease stains, held these instruments with the reverence of a surgeon handling surgical implements. These tools represented a career, an identity, a lifetime of meticulous work. But as he locked the locker for the last time, Marcus understood that this wasn't an ending. It was a transformation. He was trading one form of service for another, moving from protecting individual aircraft to protecting entire fleets, from maintaining machines to identifying threats that machines couldn't detect. The next morning, Marcus reported to his new office at Naval Intelligence Headquarters in San Diego. The building was nondescript, heavily secured, with multiple layers of access control and security verification. He was issued new credentials, briefed on classified protocols, and introduced to the team of intelligence analysts who would be his colleagues. Admiral Hartley personally escorted him to his new office, a secure space with classified computer systems and access to the communications databases he would be analyzing. Before leaving, the Admiral placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Welcome to a new chapter, Thompson. You're exactly where you need to be." Marcus sat down at his desk and looked at the classified computer system before him. Somewhere in the vast networks of military communications, anomalies were occurring. Threats were being obscured within the noise of routine transmissions. Enemies were attempting to exploit vulnerabilities. And Marcus Thompson, a mechanic with grease permanently etched into his skin and integrity burned into his soul, was ready to find them. 6 months had passed since Marcus Thompson accepted his position at Naval Intelligence Headquarters. The transformation had been profound and disorienting in equal measure. He'd traded the concrete reality of aircraft maintenance for the abstract complexity of signals analysis and threat assessment. His hands, once perpetually stained with hydraulic fluid and engine grease, were now clean, a detail that surprised him every time he looked at them. Yet the permanent stains remained, visible reminders of who he'd been and the journey that had brought him to this moment. The intelligence office occupied the 3rd and 4th floors of a nondescript building in San Diego, hidden behind unmarked doors and secured access points. The personnel who worked there came from diverse backgrounds: former military intelligence specialists, computer scientists, linguists, and analysts trained in the arcane art of identifying threats buried within vast quantities of data. Marcus had been brought in specifically because of his unique talent for pattern recognition in communications systems. He was the bridge between technical expertise and intuitive understanding, someone who could see connections that algorithms sometimes missed. His daily work involved reviewing encrypted communications transmissions from across the Pacific Fleet, analyzing them for anomalies similar to those he'd identified in the original espionage investigation. He designed training protocols that taught other analysts to recognize the subtle signatures of covert signal embedding. He consulted on the implementation of new security measures, specifically designed to prevent the type of espionage operation that had nearly compromised critical military operations. The work was classified at the highest levels. Marcus couldn't discuss the specifics of what he did with anyone outside his immediate team. When friends from his maintenance days asked what he was doing now, he simply explained that he'd moved into a consulting role for naval security. The vagueness was necessary, the secrecy a burden he carried without complaint. On a Tuesday afternoon in late September, exactly 6 months after receiving his Navy Achievement Medal, Marcus was called to Admiral Hartley's office. The Admiral had maintained an ongoing interest in Marcus's work, reviewing progress reports and personally conducting quarterly evaluations. But this summons felt different, more formal, more significant. When Marcus entered the Admiral's office, he found not just Hartley, but three other high-ranking officials. One was a Rear Admiral responsible for Pacific Fleet operations. Another was a civilian official from the Office of Naval Intelligence. The third was a woman Marcus didn't recognize, dressed in civilian clothes but carrying herself with the authority of someone accustomed to significant responsibility. "Sit down, Thompson," Hartley said, gesturing to a chair facing the desk. "I want to discuss your performance over the past 6 months and what we're planning for your future." Hartley opened a folder containing performance evaluations and reports. "Your work has exceeded expectations. You've identified 17 potential security vulnerabilities across the fleet communications systems. You've trained 43 analysts in your pattern recognition methodology. You've contributed to the redesign of our signal monitoring protocols. Most importantly, you've helped us identify and prevent 2 additional espionage attempts, smaller operations than the Vance Walsh conspiracy, but potentially significant." Marcus felt a mixture of pride and humility, hearing the scope of his contributions quantified so directly. The Rear Admiral leaned forward. "We're considering expanding your role significantly. We want you to lead a new division dedicated specifically to counterintelligence threat identification. You'd have authority over a team of 20 specialized analysts, with direct reporting to Admiral Hartley and myself. The position would carry the civilian equivalent of a senior officer rank, with commensurate compensation and security clearances." "Sir, I'm honored," Marcus began, "but I'm concerned about my qualifications. I'm a maintenance technician by training. I don't have formal intelligence education." The woman in civilian clothes smiled slightly. "Mr. Thompson, formal education is valuable, but so is the kind of practical wisdom you've demonstrated. You identified a major espionage operation through careful observation and pattern analysis. You've trained intelligence analysts who have gone on to identify additional threats. You understand both the technical and human elements of counterintelligence in ways that purely academic training can't provide." She extended her hand. "I'm Director Patricia Chen, Office of Naval Intelligence. Admiral Hartley has recommended you highly for this expanded role. We'd like you to accept." Marcus shook her hand, feeling the weight of the moment. This was genuine opportunity, the chance to lead, to shape policies, to protect military personnel on a scale he'd never imagined possible. It was also significant responsibility. People would be relying on his judgment, his expertise, his instincts. The stakes would be enormous. "I accept, Director Chen," he said. "Thank you for the opportunity." The formal announcement of Marcus's promotion came in early October. A ceremony was organized at Naval Intelligence Headquarters, attended by senior leadership from across the Pacific Fleet and the broader intelligence community. Marcus stood in dress whites, the same uniform he'd worn at the earlier medal ceremony, but this time the significance felt different. He was no longer being recognized for a single discovery. He was being acknowledged as a leader, a visionary, someone whose contributions would shape the future of military security. Admiral Hartley personally conducted the ceremony. As Marcus stood before an assembled crowd of intelligence professionals and military officers, the Admiral spoke about the qualities that made someone truly effective in security roles. "It's not technical knowledge alone. It's not years of experience alone. It's the combination of technical expertise, integrity, and the courage to see what others overlook. Marcus Thompson possesses all of these qualities. He's proven that one person with the right combination of skills and character can protect thousands of lives." After the ceremony, Marcus walked the hallways of the Naval Intelligence Headquarters for the first time as a division leader. His new office was significantly larger than his previous one, with a view overlooking the San Diego harbor. Through the window, he could see the aircraft carriers anchored in the distance, massive vessels representing the power projection capabilities of the American military. He thought about the thousands of sailors aboard those ships, the special operations personnel deployed across the Pacific, the submarine crews operating in the depths of the ocean. His work, the work of his division, protected them all. That evening, Marcus returned to his apartment and sat in his leather armchair, the same one where he'd made the discovery that had changed his life. He reflected on the journey from that sleepless night in March to this moment in October. He thought about Captain Reeves's humiliation of him, about the pain and anger that had driven him to investigate the radio anomalies, about the investigation that had cascaded outward to reveal a conspiracy he'd never imagined. His phone rang. It was Bull Morrison. "Thompson, I saw the announcement about your promotion," Bull said over the line. "Director of a new intelligence division at headquarters. That's incredible, son. You've come a long way from that maintenance technician who didn't know who to trust." "I couldn't have done it without you, Bull," Marcus replied sincerely. "You believed in me when I was lost." "No," Bull said. "You did the work. I just pointed you towards someone who could help you take action. But I always knew you had something special, that ability to see things others miss. I'm glad the Navy finally recognized it." Over the following weeks, Marcus began building his division. He recruited talented intelligence analysts from across the Navy, selecting people who possessed not just technical expertise, but also the kind of intuitive thinking that characterized his own work. He developed comprehensive training protocols for identifying anomalies in military communications. He created systems and databases that would allow analysts to cross-reference patterns across multiple installations simultaneously. The work was challenging and deeply satisfying. Marcus was no longer just reacting to problems. He was proactively creating systems designed to prevent the kinds of threats that had nearly compromised military security. He was training the next generation of security professionals. He was shaping the culture of vigilance and integrity across the intelligence community. 3 months after his promotion, Marcus attended a classified briefing in which the Director of Naval Intelligence presented the results of his division's work to the Secretary of the Navy. In just 90 days, his team had identified 14 potential security vulnerabilities and prevented 3 additional espionage attempts at various naval installations. The metrics were impressive, but what struck Marcus most was the human element, knowing that his work had protected real people, real operations, real lives. The Secretary of the Navy, a woman with the bearing of someone who'd spent her entire career understanding the complexities of military leadership, pulled Marcus aside after the briefing. "Your work is making a genuine difference," she said. "The threats you're identifying and the protocols you're implementing are setting a new standard for military security across the entire Department of Defense. The President's office has been briefed on your contributions. You should know that your work is being recognized at the highest levels." Marcus felt genuinely humbled. His journey had taken him from the concrete floors of Hangar 7 to the corridors of power, where the most sensitive military decisions were made. One evening, nearly a year after the initial discovery that had changed everything, Marcus attended a small gathering at Admiral Hartley's home. The Admiral had invited Marcus, Bull Morrison, Special Agent Chen, and several other key figures from the investigation to a private dinner. They sat on Hartley's patio overlooking the San Diego harbor, watching sailboats move across the darkening water. "To new beginnings," Hartley said, raising his glass in a toast. "To men and women who have the courage to stand for integrity even when it costs them personally. To systems that reward that courage rather than punishing it." As glasses clinked around the table, Marcus looked at the faces of the people who'd believed in him. Hartley, Bull, Chen. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. The humiliation in Hangar 7 had been the catalyst, but it had only been the beginning. The real strength had come from his choice to respond with integrity rather than revenge, to investigate carefully rather than react emotionally, to trust the process of truth-telling even when it was uncomfortable and risky. Later, as the gathering was ending, Admiral Hartley walked Marcus to his car. The Admiral's hand rested briefly on Marcus's shoulder. "You've accomplished something remarkable," Hartley said. "You've built a culture of security and vigilance that will protect military personnel for decades to come. But more importantly, you've demonstrated that one person with integrity and the courage to see what others overlook, can change the course of history." Marcus drove home through the San Diego night, the city lights reflecting off the harbor. He thought about the mechanic he'd been, the person working quietly in Hangar 7, never expecting his careful attention to detail, would eventually lead him to this moment. He thought about the future, about the threats his division would prevent, the lives that would be saved, the military operations that would succeed because of the security protocols his team was implementing. His hands were clean now, no longer stained with grease. But the calluses remained, physical reminders of who he'd been and the foundation upon which everything he'd accomplished was built. Marcus Thompson had found his true mission, not through rank or authority, but through the simple act of paying attention, maintaining integrity, and having the courage to speak truth to power. As he pulled into his apartment complex, Marcus looked up at the stars visible above San Diego's light pollution. Somewhere out there, submarine crews were operating in silence. Somewhere, special operations personnel were conducting classified missions. Somewhere, pilots were training to defend the nation. And Marcus Thompson, a former aircraft mechanic, was part of the system that protected them all. His journey from humiliation to vindication was complete, but his mission to protect American service members had only just begun.